I've entitled my thoughts for today, Not a Zero-Sum Game. And we'll be looking at a parable that Jesus told, which is recorded in Luke's Gospel, chapter 16, verses 1 to 15. It may be just that I wasn't previously paying attention, but it seems to me that I hear people talking more about zero-sum thinking than I used to. In simple terms, a zero-sum game means that for one person to win, another person has to lose. That's how most table games we play work. It's also why my mother cautioned me when desserts were passed around. If, for instance, I would take an extra big piece of pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving, it meant that someone else would automatically end up with a smaller piece. Having a zero-sum awareness isn't necessarily bad. Thinking in terms of zero-sum can have the positive effect of making us cooperative, ensuring that there is pie left over for others to enjoy. Or we might find a way of having a bigger pie. Unfortunately, there is a dark approach to zero-sum thinking where everyone grabs what they can before the pie plate is empty. Instead of celebrating cooperation, that kind of zero-sum thinking threatens to turn people into competitive monsters. Rather than making sure that there is enough for everybody, zero-sum thinking can cause us to be consumed with believing that another person's success robs me of what could have been mine, or maybe even thinking what should have been mine. It's why people sometimes feel threatened by immigrants who are perceived as taking away jobs or other opportunities. When it comes to zero-sum thinking and our approach to life, an important question for us is this: do we believe that someone else has to lose in order for us to win? Or do we believe that there is a way for us all to win together? Or to turn it into theological terms, does the Bible teach that loyalty to God and loyalty to ourselves are mutually exclusive? The parable of the shrewd manager in Luke 16 is one of the most puzzling parables that Jesus told. Some Bible interpreters turn themselves into knots trying to explain this parable, while others suggest that it can be explained in a simple sentence or two. I suspect, though, that it's not the parable we find as upsetting as the statement Jesus made at the end of his story. Jesus' conclusion strikes at the very core of a sensitive issue. With a gut-wrenching statement, Jesus said, "You cannot serve both God and money." And interestingly, at least the New International Version capitalizes both God and also capitalizes money, the word money. It kind of sounds like Jesus was promoting a zero-sum approach about money and God. Or was he? Was Jesus really saying that in order to serve God, we have to become impoverished? Was Jesus saying that God demands we only look out for others and never ourselves? As we read Jesus' parable here in Luke 16, ask yourself if being loyal to God means that we have to give up loyalty to ourselves. This is what Jesus said according to Luke 16, verses 1 to 15. Jesus told his disciples, "There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do now? My master's taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses.' So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, How much do you owe my master?" 3,000 liters of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 1,500. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 30 tons of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 24. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." When it comes to loyalty, Jesus' parable demonstrates that few things in life challenge our loyalties like money. There's no doubt that the shrewd manager's loyalty was primarily to himself. At first glance, he appeared to be a self-serving, selfish, and dishonest person, which makes us shocked that Jesus appeared to approve of his actions. How was that possible? We should keep in mind that Jesus qualified his description of the situation by saying that people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are people of the light. So while Jesus did not endorse the manager's character, he also did not condemn the manager's actions. Even though the financial manager appeared to be exceptionally clever, he could not keep the rich man from discovering that his accounts were in disarray. Because the manager was known to be clever, it was unlikely that he had simply made poor business decisions. Rather, we are led to suspect that he had manipulated the rich man's accounts in order to selfishly benefit himself. Some Bible interpreters suggest that the manager was charging additional interest to what the rich man charged, leading the rich man's clients to complain of mistreatment. But instead of sending the manager packing on the spot, the rich man apparently allowed the manager some time to face his dilemma. The manager had lived a soft life and was about to walk away with a tarnished resume. Future employment was going to be a problem. With calculated shrewdness, the manager came up with a plan. He called in his master's debtors and proceeded to slash what was owing on their accounts. If he had indeed been charging interest on top of the interest his boss initially charged, then he had given himself some financial leeway to make the debt reductions generous. His future would be secure, the manager reasoned, if the rich man's many debtors felt they owed him for having reduced their debts. It was a deviously successful plan. Not only did he garner goodwill among the debtors, but he put the rich man in a bind. Through the process of slashing the debts, the manager made the rich man look generous. The debtors will have assumed that the rich man was authorizing the debt reductions, and the rich man would not be able to collect on the original debts without damaging his own reputation in the community. Instead of being angry, the rich man was forced to admit that the manager, though dishonest, had outwitted him. No wonder Jesus offered his surprising approval of the manager's actions. The shrewd manager successfully bypassed a zero-sum scenario, making winners of both the rich man and himself. Even though Jesus was careful to not approve of the shrewd manager's methods, he did make an important point. Loyalty to others does not demand disloyalty to ourselves. When it comes to God, we can mistakenly conclude that loyalty to God and loyalty to ourselves is a mutually exclusive zero-sum game. That's a real problem, because if we come to the conclusion that loyalty to God means that my personal goals and well-being don't matter, we will end up having a really hard time being loyal to God. With this parable, Jesus drew attention to the fact that loyalty to oneself means preparing for the future. The shrewd manager, though dishonest, was to be commended for using the strength of his position to prepare for his uncertain future. Jesus' message from day one was all about preparing for both the near and distant future. We are meant to understand that God cares about our future, which is why Jesus said that his intent was for people to prepare to experience the fullness of life within God's kingdom. The unavoidable conclusion we are left with is that while preparing for the future demands being loyalty to ourselves, it does not necessarily conflict with being loyal to God. To answer our earlier question, loyalty to God is not mutually exclusive to loyalty to ourselves. With an ironic twist in the parable, what was good for the dishonest manager ended up being good for the rich man, who both ended up benefiting from the goodwill of the lenders, or I should say of the debtors. The good news in this parable is that a relationship with God is not a zero-sum game where we are forced to lose in order for God to win. For instance, if we look at the list of attributes known as the fruits of the Spirit in Galatians 5 verses 22 to 23, we can see we have the potential to win alongside God. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control are the fruits of the Spirit which define what loyalty to God looks like. It's noteworthy that there's not a single attribute on the list of spiritual fruits that we don't want to be true of ourselves. In other words, loyalty to ourselves also means that we become people who exhibit the same fruit which demonstrates loyalty to God. An important message within the parable of the shrewd manager is that loyalty to God turns us into the kind of people that we all admire and want to become. A relationship with God should never be considered a zero-sum game. Maybe that's why Jesus said that we cannot serve both God and money. Money wants to turn us into zero-sum players, but God does not.